Uh, Good afternoon, members, members of the public joining us online, guests to the committee. Good afternoon, welcome to today's committee, Performance, Finance, Customer Focus Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we start proceedings, usual warnings. There's no planned drill, so if the alarm does go off, please leave and follow the exit routes. Can I please ask you to use your microphone when addressing the meeting, and that it is switched off when you're not using it. And if you can ensure your mobile device, as I'm demonstrating, is turned to silent. Thank you. And if it's one of those annoying phones that just constantly vibrates on the table, we may consider fining you 50p or something like that. As indicated, this meeting is being broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewings. By entering the Washbite room today and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. Apologies. First thing on the agenda, Mr. Jago, do we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Councillor Bingley is substituted by Councillor Mahoney, and Councillor Bill Stevens is substituted by Councillor Gilmore. I also understand we have apologies from Councillor Toohey.
That's noted. No substitute, but apologies noted. Thank you. Next on the list is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect of the items on the agenda today, please? Councillor Stoneman.
In relation to item 7 on the agenda, due to a conflict with a family member working in the department, I will not be speaking on the agenda item, but I will be staying in the room.
Thank you, that's noted. No other declarations. Thank you. Item number 3, minutes. Members, that's at pages 1 to 10 of your papers, and I invite you to confirm to the contrary. Are there any issues in respect of the minutes? Otherwise, I will sign those off as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 26th of July. Anything to the contrary? Great. I won't go through them. I'm sure you've read them all in advance of the meeting. Thank you. I'll sign those after the meeting. Chair's urgent business. I've not been appraised of any. Ross, nothing? That's great. Thank you. Okay, to item number 5. Councillor Lowry, warm welcome to the committee as always. I believe you're going to introduce the report, and David Northey is also here in attendance to assist. Over to you, Councillor Lowry.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, panel. I last presented month 3 to you, which had been a month ago. This is month 4, and the details set out in table 2. Basically, there's effectively been no change between month 3 and month 4, and the forecast directorate overspends are shown. In essence, little's changed. We've still got the pressures that are shown in the report. Primarily, you won't be surprised to hear that we are continuing to see a forecast overspend in children's services, adult social care, and homelessness. And myself and David, along with the Chief Executive and other officers, are doing an extensive amount of work in these areas. As I said at the last meeting, we are currently undertaking what I'm referring to as a roundtable exercise, where we're doing some deep dives into each of these areas to understand exactly what's going on, and a number of measures have been put in place to address the considerable overspend. It is much larger than I'd like it to be. Projecting forward, there does continue to be some pressure in children's services, and we'll undoubtedly see a further increase next month. However, the actions being taken in respect of both homelessness and adult social care are moving in the right direction. Over and above that, Chair, I don't think I've actually got anything further to say, because the report has not changed considerably since last month, but I'm very happy to take any questions the panel may have. Thank you.
Nothing to add, David. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Members, over to you for any questions, observations, any feedback. Looking for I should have said actually, Vice Chair, of course, will note names and invite you to speak, and he will then nudge me if I overlook you. Anything at all? Thank you, Councillor Powser.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update there, Mark, as well. And I think the report reflects the dire state of the financial situation the council was in, the budget pressures. Really interested to see that you're making some progress trying to tackle some of these challenges, and you mentioned some aspects around roundtables and deep dives. Is it possible just to elaborate further on the context of those and who's involved?
So if you were to take homelessness as an example, the volume of homelessness that's taking place in the city is quite considerable at the moment. Literally double what we were seeing last year, and the current budget we've got is insufficient. Obviously, we're needing to provide, it's a statutory duty to provide care for those homeless people, so we're having to work with the likes of our housing providers to see what vacancies they've got so we can use some of their existing stock. In addition to that, we're looking at converting some of our existing buildings. An obvious example being Midland House. Obviously, that's been vacated by Children's Services, and we're currently undertaking an exercise where we can look at converting that into a number of units to deal with some of the homelessness that exists. So those roundtables are chaired by myself, for instance. Chief Executive is present, the Directorate lead, so Matt would be there from that perspective along with his team, and we're going through it line by line, understanding the cost base and what measures we can take to get homelessness down. The same thing applies to Children's Services. That, of course, should be aware that there is an improvement notice that's been issued by Ofsted. So a panel has been set up, and that's chaired by an independent person from Dorset County Council from memory. And the Chief Executive is present along with David, along with the leader of the council, along with Jemima Lang, the portfolio lead for Children's Services, and all the directorate managers need to be in attendance. So we have elevated each of these problem areas to my level at the very basic, but alongside me is Chief Executive and the leader, the portfolio holder, and all the necessary directors. Undoubtedly, there should be an opportunity for yourselves as a scrutiny panel to engage with that. I would suggest at some stage, homelessness being an obvious example, I'm very happy for myself and the homelessness leads to come before you, because I think it's an incredibly important part of what the council is doing at the moment, and one that is becoming a problem for us. So we're meeting regularly to deal with those, but at some stage, like I've said, it would be appropriate for some pre-decision scrutiny on some of those issues, for you guys to look into it and see what value you can add.
Councillor Hendy, thank you.
The question around the conversion of Midland House, are you looking at converting the whole lot into units? And if you are, how long would it take to get your money, not your money back, but if you're paying accommodation each night for so many years now, how long would it take to start seeing a saving on using external sources for housing?
So I can't give you a specific answer to that at the moment, but the whole basis of what we're attempting to do is, if you think about the revenue expenditure we're currently putting into providing hotel accommodation for people who are homeless, if we were to convert Midland House, it's not just Midland House, that may or may not happen, it's an option at the moment. Obviously, that revenue provision, what we would do then is change it to a capital provision, so we'd borrow some money, we'd convert a property, and by doing so, we would be paying the money back over a period of a year. But the whole basis of anything we do, of course, it would be illogical not to do so, to ensure that over a period of time, we get a return on our investment. So therefore, it will be cheaper for us to borrow some money, convert a property or properties into providing accommodation for homeless people, and thereby relieving the revenue budget by paying that debt off over a period of time. Now, obviously what we normally do when you think about capital expenditure, you profile the expenditure over a period of time relating to how long the asset lasts. So if you were to take a dust cart, for instance, they only last for about 7 years, for instance, so the borrowing has to be paid back in that 7-year period. But if it's a house, for instance, it would be over a 25-year period.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that there was executive office pressure caused by 3 by-elections which weren't budgeted for, and apparently work is underway to find management savings to offset this pressure. What has any work actually been done on that? What are those savings going to look like?
I'm going to ask David to answer that because I know he's been working with that department in detail, so I'm sure he can help me and answer that question.
So thank you. So yes, the pressure came from something that obviously we didn't know when we set the budget, so we have to accept that from that point of view, don't we? But I'm working very closely with the Chief Exec's office, so it's sort of a global term of management savings, but a bit like Councillor Larry was talking about workshops and so on, we call them a deep dive into the budget. So I'm going through a line by line review to make sure that where there's agency spends or vacancies to cover those training, all the lines that you would expect to see if they can cover their own cost. And also Glenda, who looks after the elections team itself, is working very closely with the Home Office to try and get some more funding through to help as well. So I'm confident we will be able to alleviate in some way.
So, Councillor Gosling.
Thank you very much, Chair.
You weren't on the list.
I know I wasn't on the list.
And
I
you're
thought
running the list.
Sneak in, at the end, just in case, there is any room. So on the report, I notice in section A, it highlights that there are no differences in the overall budget from month 3, because presumably this report comes to the committee every month. Would it be possible to aid the reading of the report to have an indication in section B in the directorate review to indicate where there are changes month on month? Because I think for when you're getting down to the detail, to understand where where change is coming in, are things becoming more negative, or are we making improvements and things becoming more positive? So to see as the months go on, we can see differences in the figures, which means that we don't have to compare back to months on months. Does that be possible? Thank you very much.
Just to give you assurance that because the next month that we're starting to work on doesn't look like there is movement, that is exactly what we're doing. We're going to put a schedule in to highlight it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mark, if I can, we know the direction of travel at period 4 now. Last time you were here, it was 8.1 was the gap, and the gap now at 7.5. So direction of travel is good, but we are at period 4 in the second quarter, and that's still quite a seismic gap at this stage of the year. And I take on board your observations in respect of where those gaps are in your report is very helpful. And you've highlighted one with Councillor Poyser in respect of children's services. And just focusing on that area, if I may, and I appreciate that's not your portfolio, but the issue in terms of improvement notes is not exclusive to Plymouth, that should be said. There are a lot of other local authorities that are in that position. And do you see that, just that in itself, being a further risk? Because in light of the savings that need to be achieved in children's services, according to your report, and similar pressures across children's services across our peninsula, who are also on improvement notices, do you see that as a position that's going to worsen, or can we sit here at this stage of the year with some confidence that those savings will be made? Or found, rather.
No. So children's services has got an improvement notice, as you referred to, and we went through that yesterday in cabinet planning. And there is a spreadsheet that shows probably a good dozen lines that need to be improved upon by this council. And the implications of that financially have yet to be figured out in its entirety, and that is the responsibility of that board that has been set up. I know from my conversations with the Chief Executive yesterday is that because we haven't necessarily taken all the actions we needed to do in the past, what we're seeing currently is a bulge in the number of children that we're having to deal with, and that bulge is continuing. And until we get past that stage, we won't get to a position where we start to see a deterioration, an improvement in the number of children that we're actually looking after. So I'm not going to commit at this stage to saying that we're likely to see an improvement in the forecast outturn for children, because my understanding at the moment is we're likely to see a further deterioration in that situation.
Yes.
Sorry,
Go
can I
ahead,
just,
David.
no, I absolutely agree with what Councillor Larry is saying, and the bulge is something that is exercising everybody's thoughts at the moment. So I think just to manage expectations, children will get worse before they get better. But the phrase that the Chief Executive is using, which is a new one to me, but I'll take it, is we're all leaning in order to support that directorate. And if that means that other directorates have to tighten the belt a little bit, we're fully concentrating on the fact that we have got a specific area, children's, that we need to be looking at. But just to manage expectations, I'm absolutely certain the next report you will see it getting worse before it starts to get better. Children's services, yeah, not overall.
Yeah, I'm grateful for your response. Sorry, did you want to come back on that?
sorry, I was being corrected by my colleague.
Okay. Yeah, it's something that I think we as a scrutiny panel will be eagerly observing and looking for regular updates in respect to that, because, as you say, the problem is going to get worse before we start seeing improvement. And the picture at the moment, and I appreciate how difficult it is in that service, but the picture isn't great in terms of the financial implications of that, notwithstanding the very important role that service provision for our looked after people. I saw you and Councillor Poyser. You're running the list, so next to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on David's comments there about the Chief Executive's approach. I think everyone's leaning in, and you've got that help and support from directors to tackle this issue with funding in children's services, which is important. It's a really important issue, and it's important we maintain those standards in that service. Does that involve maybe moving budget from other areas within the directorates, and is there any pressures on any ring-fenced funding, as in funding which may have been ring-fenced by government for anything? Is there any pressures there that have come to light?
So ring-fence funding is ring-fence funding, so you cannot spend anything other than that it's been allocated for. So, you know, for instance, Councillor Coker and the transport team will get funding for a new road. As much as we might like to spend on other pressures from time to time, we don't have that luxury. So whilst it's earmarked, it has to be spent on the project that it was allocated to.
Chair, may I just give a little bit of context? And I know Councillor Larry touched on this, but it looks, I'll use the word ugly, 7.5 million, but there are three sort of key areas that we need to be thinking about, which is children's social care, adult social care, and the homelessness. And it doesn't help the situation in Plymouth, but when I talk nationally to colleagues, there are three issues that they always talk about, and it always used to be a firm focus on adults, and then it became adults and children's, and now it's very clearly across the country, adults, children's, and homelessness. So I took the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to take up Deluxe offer of having a conversation about what are the pressures that are affecting Plymouth, and they sent a template through to aid the conversation, and they wanted to know all the numbers about adults and children's, and then they had a free box at the bottom, so I filled in the free box to say, and don't forget homelessness, so that we had a really useful conversation about those three areas and the fact that it's not just us, and we are having to deal with, you know, the funding issues. There's all kinds of legacies because of COVID, because the grants dried up, etc., etc. So just to put it into context, it doesn't look very nice, but we're not alone. And I can assure you we are all pedalling very hard in the background to come up with solutions to get this balance through.
Thank you very much, Chair. The language that both of you have used in describing the call on services, children's services, is a bulge. A bulge is described by a positive slope followed by some sort of plateau and a negative slope. From your language also, you don't seem to have arrived at that negative slope yet of a reduction in forward need for children's services. So what evidence have you got that this is actually a bulge and that these call on services will reduce in time and that this is not a permanent increase or continually gradually increase in the need for child's services?
So I always said if I say can we stop the conversation, then something's gone wrong. But can you indulge me for a second? There is two big committees now looking in particular at children's services. So we've got the external review of what's best for the children and the systems, and we've got an internal review led by the chief exec, which is helping me get underneath the finances. So I think it's early days for me to give you a definitive response to that question, but we spent a good hour this morning looking at some of the forecasting, not just on the number of children and the throughput, but also what that would do from my point of view, from a financial point of view. So we can quite clearly see the bulge coming in, and we're starting to see where that might start to come down. But at this stage, I think it would be a bit premature of me to give you a definitive answer. We can see where we're going, but there's lots of work going on in the background.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anybody else on the list. I'm very grateful for that. Mark, did you want to discuss the capital program movement? We're just noting that in any event, but did you want to say anything about that?
No, because it was actually presented at full council last week.
Thank you, I'm grateful. Well, the recommendations of the committee is that we note the forecast revenue monitoring position at period 4 as set out in this report in the sum of 7.5 million, and the capital budget 2023 to 2028 is revised, as members will recall, at the last full council to 562.416 million, and that's set out in table 1 of your report. Councillor Lowry, David, thank you very much for attending. Very helpful. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the draft corporate plan performance report at pages 21 to 60 of your papers, councillors. Councillor Pemberdi, very warm welcome to the committee. I believe you're introducing this part of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. So last time I was here, I told you I'd be coming back with not a draft performance report rather than a final performance report, because we wanted to make some changes. And so I think this afternoon's conversation will help us do that process. The reason I say that is when I was sat in your chair last year and the year before, I kept on asking for the role of scrutiny in ensuring that the performance report helped scrutiny across all 4 panels do their work, as well as the Cabinet do their work and the CMT and the staff team do theirs. And the one bit that had been missed out of that, traditionally, was scrutiny being able to shape the way a performance report looked. So it's draft because we are still anticipating making changes over the course of this year. But let me get into some of the finer detail. I just wanted to put that bit of context about why it's not a normal performance report. And you are seeing it before Cabinet because I want to be able to hear any recommendations you have before we take it to Cabinet in a couple of weeks. So this report is also a report that covers a cusp, because it covers the end of the previous administration and the start of this one. And it also covers the previous corporate plan and a new corporate plan, which means that it's a point at change and effectively marks the final performance report on the previous corporate plan and the baseline start for the new corporate plan. So it's one of these that I'm going to try and take us through a journey that's less about oh, who's to blame for that, than rather this is the shape of it and this is what it looks like, because this is the stuff that not me trying to be awkward, but just be reflecting the position we're in. The first thing I'd like to say is that at the last meeting I was being asked lots of stuff and there was a bit of confusion. On each of the indicators in this report, you will see which scrutiny panel is responsible for the actual scrutiny of that performance indicator, because you're responsible for some of the indicators and areas, but your responsibility, as you know, Chair, is also the overarching approach to performance in the council. And in some ways, this is our opportunity to look a bit more at that overarching approach. I've also made sure that helpfully we've told you which cabinet members are leading on each of those bits. So now when I'm saying you need to go and approach this cabinet member about it, it's because they will have the detail. And you know, you've just been talking about homelessness. I'll be talking about homelessness. I'm sure we'll talk about homelessness again. That approach means that you can be talking to the right people. And while I might know a bit of headline stuff about what Mark Coker's doing, he's not sitting and he could do the same on homelessness, but I'm spending at least one portfolio session a week purely on homelessness without any of the fringes and the additional meetings and the external meetings. And I couldn't know Mark's portfolio in the same detail that I know mine, and vice versa. So I just wanted to put that context of, and I'm not going to get all of Mark's details out of his head on his performance indicators into mine in time to come here, because otherwise I won't be doing the work on homelessness or other things in my portfolio. So I'm not trying to be awkward when I make those referrals. I'll do my best, but if I make that referral, please just accept it, and maybe you sort of say to another scrutiny chair at management board, we've spotted this, could you pick this up? So that, once again, framing the way I'll try and handle that, not only on this report, but in the future year. So that's that. The themes are the themes of the corporate plan, the election promises of this administration, the 5 key pledges around crime and antisocial behaviour, potholes, cleaner streets, new homes, green investment and better access to healthcare and dentistry. We've also put in there the +2 that have been added around the cost of living crisis and the growing up, growing old agenda that actually looks at how we transition people from early life right through to the end, but how life in Plymouth, which Councillor Mrs Aspinall is leading on. And those bits that are about the how we do it, as well as our priorities, are also in here. So we're also giving you a performance framework that's about how we do things, as well as the top level. So we put extra stuff in the way we structured the performance report this year so that people can approach it from different angles, and that might mean that different panels will want to address it in different ways, but we're trying to be as transparent as we can to help in both management and scrutiny. We also know, because of the way the manifesto was written, that this is not just about the council. If we're talking about health, it's also about partners. So some of the KPIs we can't do very much about, but they're KPIs that indicate a direction of travel for the whole city. That's especially true in some of those areas like crime and antisocial behaviour, in adults' health and social care, in children's services, where actually our external partners, the NHS and the police especially, and the school establishments in MATs, are really important, but we have very few levers and it's more our influence. But we want to report on those because those are actually probably more accurate KPIs than anything we'd have in-house in telling a full picture. The report today gives you 51 indicators. That's an increase of 10 on the previous corporate plan report. Doesn't mean that there might not be a few added over the next bit of review. So once again, we're trying to give you some more things you can indicate on. But it's not all new. 26 of the indicators were in the previous corporate plan report. So there's also a bit of continuity as well as a bit of development. And I think that's important. At the moment, we report a lot on what's happened in the last month, the last quarter. And that's really interesting in what's happened in the last month or the last quarter. But you know, actually, if there's problems with road gritting, well, because he's sitting over there, so I'm not taking his name in vain. Mark will, yeah, if there's a peak of road gritting issues in the summer, it's got what's gone wrong. But you know, road gritting will be taken over the course of a year. There are those fluxes just in terms of normal supply and demand of front door. So we probably want to move away a bit from the noise and move on to some signal stuff. So what are parameters? So we're going to look at how we might present data in different ways to not only show what the month-on-month change is, but what are the parameters that we work within as normal good practice to give a sense of where the blips are, because the blip might not be, oh, you've done this month and that's unusual. It's because, well, in December we were closed down for Christmas, so there was less front door activity compared to January, which is a longer month and much more open, and we're doing a catch up. So we're just going to try and do some things over the course of the year that help people to understand and spot, both in terms of management, administration and scrutiny, where we need to focus on the things that are abnormal on a long-term basis rather than just on a short-term basis. I do want to pull out a few bits here that are interesting. I'm not going to claim credit for them, and to be honest, I think it'd be wrong for the previous administration to claim credit for them, because we don't know what's happened in terms of this point in the quarter or that point in the quarter. But over that quarter, antisocial behaviour interventions increased by more than 50% on the previous quarter. It was one of our priorities. We know it's also one of the Police and Crime Commissioner's priorities. We know it's a national government priority. Where it sits, who's responsible, who knows. We haven't done that deep dive. It's not my portfolio, I haven't done it, but I think it's really good that we're making more interventions. That's good for the people of Plymouth. We've also seen a marginal decrease in the number of children with repeat child protection plans. Is it a blip? Is it not? We don't know. We haven't got that signal rather than noise bit, but that's, I think, an encouraging sign. There are significant factors facing the council. In some ways, a new corporate plan and a new administration highlight those, because they're the bits that were probably not doing so well the previous time. And every change of administration produces one of those, because it's always one of the reasons there's a change of administration. And two of the ones I'd like to particularly highlight there, you've just been talking about homelessness. We are doing an enormous amount on homelessness. It's not just a budgetary issue. It's about the quality of life of people who are facing Section 21 evictions. It's the impact on children and their education. It's actually a front door indicator of a whole housing market, which has implications on the private rented sector, on owners, on mortgages, interest rates, as well as the homelessness system. I wanted to say that is actually my key priority as a portfolio holder. I would welcome it, Chair, if you would actually maybe schedule a session on homelessness at a future meeting, so we can come and unpack not only some of the challenges, but also some of the actions that we're taking to do it, because it is a really meaty subject. I just wanted to give you some reassurance as to some of the headline things that are happening in terms of how we're tackling it. Bed and breakfast numbers we brought down from about 220 households a night back in May to just over 160 earlier this week. That's a really good direction of travel. It's not necessarily impacting on the budget, because what we've been doing is taking vulnerable people, couples and families, and putting them in more Airbnb. So we're still paying by the night, but it's not in a hotel room, it's somewhere more suitable for them to be staying. But that means then we've got the whole temporary accommodation agenda, whether it's Midland House, Raglan, other solutions. There's a whole load of stuff on the plate there, but I think that's really good. We're also really ramping up the activity on the front door to try and prevent homelessness. So now if someone comes and says, I'm being made homeless because I really can't stay anymore in the family, and the issue is there's not enough storage in the house, but there's some space outside, we will pay for a garden shed to be put up so that people can put stuff into storage to create space in houses. We're paying for bed settees, for bunk beds. We're looking at ways that we can help people stay where they are rather than come into the homelessness system. So being much more proactive, and I think the team are doing an amazing job at both ends there. So that's some practicals, but I've been working with the Chief Executive. We co-chair now an internal housing task force, which David sits on with people from across the council, looking not just at homelessness and temporary accommodation. We're going to look at every area of housing and plan to release Plan for Homes 4 for the March Cabinet, if we manage to hit the timetable. So we look at the entire housing market, because we can't fit to the front door if we're not actually sorting homes for people to live in on a permanent basis. So we've got a big piece there. This week I've met with the Plymouth Housing Development Partnership and put out the full story for them, rather than just the delivery of new predominantly affordable homes. They have found it really helpful to understand that, and I have already had conversations, including since then, with the Chief Executive of Plymouth Community Homes, about how some of our housing providers can help us in the short term, as well as looking at what they do in the longer term. Bournemouth Churches, I've met with their Chief Executive already, and they're looking at how they can help us. I've met with senior members of Clarion. In fact, James and Tess were with me at that opportunity. We told them their development was great, their management was really bad. They needed to sort both out. As a result of that meeting, I'm meeting with the Chief Executive of Clarion in a couple of weeks' time. Next week, we're meeting with South West Landlords Association to try and understand better the issues in the private rented sector. We think we've got a fairly good idea. The Plymouth report tells us a lot, but we're actually going to say, okay, so how do we work on some of these issues together? How do we support you? How do you support us? So at every front, we are trying to tackle it. That's just the headline on one area, and it's why I think that one particularly, adults should go to the Adults Committee, children should go to the Children's Committee in terms of those two pressures. Homelessness is yours, and I would really welcome that opportunity at a future meeting. As a developing report, I want to look increasingly not only at how we're doing measured against ourselves, but how we're doing measured against comparable other local authorities. That might be family groups, it might be neighbours, it could be all sorts of things. And as the report develops, we will begin to feed more of that benchmarking information in. To help us do that, we're not only looking at offlog, which is rather limited, but we're looking at how we do a lot more work with LGA Inform, which we're already part of, because that will give us, as we pump our data in, we're able to do more comparators. They're pulling data from other sources, and I think that will help us do some benchmarking and work really collaboratively with authorities we can learn from in order to help improve our performance. I hope that helps, Chair, in placing not only some context on what we're doing on performance strategically, a couple of highlights and a couple of the really big challenges. I'm happy to do my best to answer questions, and at your request, I do have a headline briefing on every KPI, though if you ask me anything more than the headline briefing, I'm likely to say you need to go and speak to that cabinet member, but that's something that probably needs to be taken up at that panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update, Councillor Penberthy. I think just to reassure you or comfort you, you gave quite a good briefing last time you were here. We understand that we're changing how we are monitoring progress and success and risks under the new corporate plan, how that's evolving. And I repeat the request that you made last time, which is about around the KPI indicators. If members, not necessarily today, but if there's a specific KPI that you think we should be paying more attention to, or you'd be interested in seeing and tracking that, you would welcome, I'm sure, that because you're telling us these are the KPIs we should be interested in, but there are many more. I'm not in favour of enlarging the reports, more papers to read, but if there's a KPI that we think should be recorded and monitored, this is the opportunity to raise that either through today's meeting, or if you think of it afterwards, contact Councillor Penberthy or myself as chair. Is that right?
Yes, and similarly, yeah, definitely. And obviously in the report you have the headline front page. Each of those indicators is then unpacked in more detail. If there's stuff in the unpacking you think might be helpful, that's really useful. So we'll do that. Similarly, if you have technical questions on a particular KPI you want to raise in this panel, I will do my best to answer it. If you're able to let your chair know in advance of the meeting so that I get told beforehand, I will ask for a slightly more detailed briefing on that KPI, so I'm able to ask. So if you're able to read your papers a bit in advance so that we know by a few days before, I will get that report and be briefed by appropriate cabinet members and senior officers so that I can do my best to answer your questions.
And as I did last time, members receive their packs in advance of the meeting, and members always diligently go through their packs at the earliest opportunity. Next on my list is Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the setting out of the report. It's a really good tool to use and read. It was really understandable, so thank you for that. I've got a couple of points. The first one I want to raise is in the progress update on page 34, the trialling of the new patchwork system, the velocity machine. So it's really good to see that this work has been carried on in the new administration as we started it in the previous one last year. But seeing the success that we have, is there a plan going forward? Are we looking to potentially purchase a machine, or what are the steps further down the line to try and get this sort of equipment in the city on a more permanent basis? That's going to be the first point that I've got.
Just to quickly help me, I don't have a fully numbered pack. Could you give me the page number at the bottom just to help me? Thank you. In terms of velocity, although he's sitting here, he's not here for that purpose. It is Councillor Coker. I know he has been impressed and he is looking, whether it's another velocity machine, whether it's other things, we will be continually looking at how we as an administration look at new technology to address all areas of the council's work in order that we can release staff time and resources to do more work, and also look at where that might mean budget savings. So new technology isn't only about budget savings, it's also about better services. But I'm afraid in terms of the detail, that one is Councillor Coker, and I think you will find it's also one of the other panels. That would go there, but as far as I know, we are, Mark, looking at every possible use of technology for making our services better and enabling our staff team to do their jobs better.
Thank you. So in that case then, Chair, can I say, as it is in the section marked for this relevant scrutiny committee, that we take the KPI, the percentage of the carriageway defects completed on time, as something we monitor on a regular basis, because it's something that our residents deal with on a daily basis, and it is also a priority of this administration. So if that's something we could take forward and measure, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sure if you were to timetable it as an agenda item, Councillor Coker would be very happy to come and talk to you about his deep love for all sorts of techie road things.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So it forms part of the report, so you'll receive regular updates. I think this one refers to carriageway defects, so it's a KPI that we've had running for probably a number of years now, actually. We're looking at that in greater detail because there is some question marks around velocity and how you count the repairs versus potholes. So we do need to dig a little bit deeper into that data at the moment, but certainly, yeah, we'll be continuing to report the measure.
Thank you. Councillor Goslin.
Thank you, Chair. Page 30 of your report, the KPI, which is number of households prevented from becoming homeless or relieved of homelessness. I note for Q1 23-24, it's 147. This is, I would say, significantly lower than any of the KPI figures from the previous year. Can you explain why we've got that reduction? Is it a reduction in demand or a reduction in performance? Thank you.
That's page 30 at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
The red indicator, and page 54 of the pack committee.
Yeah. This is another one of those indicators we want to do some more delving into, because prevention of homelessness is not just people coming through the front door. It's not a reduction in demand. If we were to look at household prevention presentations this year, we are anticipating another substantial rise on last year, which was a substantial rise on the year before. Prevention depends on the availability of markets or the willingness of existing landlords to stop people becoming homeless. We have faced a glut of Section 21 applications. That's part of the post-COVID ripple that we always predicted when the government said we're not going to do Section 21 evictions. We said that that's going to mean 18 months of Section 21 evictions just being piled through the courts, and that will have an impact on homelessness prevention, because landlords by that time will be beyond being willing to negotiate how to keep people in their properties. And that we're dealing with. One of the other big issues we are facing is the issue of relationship breakdown, domestic violence and abuse. And it's very difficult to stop someone becoming homeless if they're trying to flee abuse, because you don't want them to stay with their abuser. And those are two of the top 3 reasons for homelessness, and those are totally beyond our control. I think what we do need to acknowledge as well, in terms of the private rented sector, talking to agents in the city as part of the work we've been doing, a lot of agents have seen a 30% drop in the stock available for them to rent since COVID. That's a lot less places available, landlords coming out of the market. So whether it's Section 21s or people just moving and not being able, there's lots of reasons for evictions, not just Section 21s. That is having a big impact. And sometimes to prevent homelessness, we find people another house. We're now down to about 15 houses being marketed on Devon Home Choice in Plymouth a month, rather than 30 a week. So that bit is short. On the private rented sector, a lot of agents are telling us that once they've had 150 applications, they just stop going and looking at any more. They'll shortlist 6 for viewings and offer to 1, and then we will get a gazumping situation where agents will get phone calls saying, I'll pay more a month. I'll pay more a month and I'll give you 6 months in advance and I'll buy you a teddy bear. It's almost anything to get that block of accommodation. So that not being available is an issue. And the whole issue of the local housing allowance now being less than half of the rent being charged in the private rented sector is having a big impact as well, because people can't afford the places that even if we can help them find. So preventing homelessness is really quite complicated. There's just some of the headlines. If Jackie was here, she could probably do you an hour on preventing homelessness before we even got on to any of the other issues. So although we've been able to do less, we are still doing what we can. And that's where, since then, I've been able to talk about the sorts of things we're now doing to try and help people stay in their homes, and the sort of work we're doing to try and ensure there are other homes for people to move to in order to prevent them becoming homeless.
Thank you. Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair. Also on page 34, the last item, maximising income from car parking and parking enforcement. Is there any detail about this? Does this mean we're just going to enforce more, or is there a proposal potentially to increase car parking charges or extend the areas where the charges are made?
I'm not aware of any such proposals at all. Councillor Lowry has just said he's not aware of any such proposals at all. Councillor Coker is looking at me rather aghast, as though there would even be those proposals. We're not aware of any proposals to increase any car parking charges, but if you're looking at future thinking, that is one that you would really need to talk to Councillor Coker about, because I'm afraid I'm not able to answer it.
But does it mean there may be some scope in enforcement to raise the income, penalties or whatever?
Potentially, I guess, but once again, that's something you would need to discuss in detail with Councillor Coker, and whether that is the right approach, that's down to judgment in terms of future developments. And if we're going to change things, then that's obviously an issue not only for administration but for Scrutiny to be involved in as well. But yeah, we're reporting the headline. I think that is one of the bits where I would say I'm not privy to that sort of level of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Poyser.
Thank you, Chair. This is my first opportunity to discuss this corporate plan at this scrutiny. So I really like this plan. It's got a really clear vision, I think, for the city. It's quite welcoming. You've got the additional indicators in there as well, so for us to monitor the performance. My eyes were sort of drawn to the section under building more homes, social and affordable ownership, where we're looking at what we know, what we do know, and it comes under housing needs. Particular reference to the number of people aged 65 over who are living with limiting long-term illnesses or mobility issues is projected to increase significantly by 2035. I was quite alarmed by that. I was just wondering whether there was it would be deemed suitable to have some kind of indicator around what measures we're doing for intervention on that area, particularly as I was drawn to that.
I think it's one of the many areas in the housing that I'd like to deal with. What we have said, I think, in the past is this is the headline report. Underneath this, there is a massive suite of performance indicators. These are the headline ones. So the manifesto pledge was very specific, so that's what we're measuring. Also, 2035 is a very long way away. It's beyond the current joint local plan. The joint local plan will be going through some degree of review, and Councillor Coker will be leading on that. As we do that, we'll be looking at needs. I think the reason I would caution against it potentially being in here as a specific indicator is that there are lots of other specific indicators around housing. If they're going to be 10, 15 years away, the movement we will see even in the course of a year will be very, very small. And so there'll probably not be a lot of reporting. And I would suggest in the headline report, we should have things that are able to be influenced and changed in the short or even the short to medium term rather than the medium to long term. I can work immediately with RPs on generically affordable housing issues. When it comes to very specialist stuff, it becomes a lot more complicated because you have to look at commissioning and all sorts of other things. So an additional care facility is 8 to 10 years in the planning pipeline from sort of start to finish, whereas a new housing development can be 3 or 4. And I think that's probably one of the reasons for honing in on that. But we wanted to tell you there are these other issues that will relate to bigger strategic planning for the city, because I think it's important that we're saying it's not just a whole load of 1-bedroom flats to meet the biggest number in band B and C. It's actually a bigger and more nuanced system that we're looking at.
And grateful. Finally on my list, Councillor Hendy.
It's more of a comment than a question, really. Just it's something very simple that you mentioned about the trying to prevent homelessness with sofa beds, and really, really refreshing that you're looking at things outside the box, and really, really pleased that you've taken it on board. It's something that I wouldn't have thought of. It seems so simple, but as a member, I'm really, really refreshed that you're looking at all these different angles. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'd just like to say it's not just me. It is an entire team and entire set of partners. And it's when frontline staff say, this is the reason, can't we do something about it? And so I would like to take this opportunity briefly to pay tribute to everyone in the system who are supporting homelessness, but especially our team who work in New George Street and day after day after day deal with people coming through the door really desperate and are doing it and coming up with the solutions and the ability to deal with it. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to them.
Okay, I'm being advised that I overlooked Councillor Allen, who wasn't on the list but is now. So if it's brief, please, because we're running quite behind now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On page 53 or 29 of your pack, the trusting and engaging our communities performance measures, that's still quite sharply down. What's behind that, and what's going to be done to address that? I appreciate that time is really short.
I think I mentioned this at our last meeting. The survey that was undertaken at a very heated time in Plymouth politics, and probably reflects more opinions on one decision than on absolutely everything. We are working really hard across not just Armada Way, but on lots of other schemes on changing the way we engage with communities. I know that tomorrow the consultation in St Budo on the replacement of the St Budo public toilets starts, and we're asking local residents there a range of opinions. So we are actively engaging in doing things at a very local level where we talk to people, and I've been working to try and make sure that across that, and I know all my colleagues are, and I'm looking forward to seeing the engagement process on Armada Way, which I think will look very different, and I know that the people undertaking that have arranged a meeting with me as a ward councillor before it goes public, in order to talk us through the process. So I think We will be doing more and we will be engaging more on lots of things, but it is that sort of thing that I think will make a difference, Chair.
I'm grateful. Yes, we did cover this significantly at the last meeting, but thank you, point noted. Councillor Bradley, thank you very much for attending and presenting. Members, I invite you to note the report and any suggested amendments through me as chair. Thank you very much for your attendance. The report's noted. Thank you. Members, we are now at item 7 on the agenda. This is a petition in respect of Ridgeway parking in Plympton. Papers within your pack set out at pages 61 to 68. In respect of this, Councillor Nicholson, are you presenting the petition? Thank you. Okay, well, I've been provided with the brief. The presenter of the petition, whether that's you together or as individual, has 5 minutes, or up to 5 minutes. Of course, you don't need to use all 5 if you so wish, but to present the petition, and then the cabinet member with responsibilities equally will have up to 5 minutes. Oh, well, that's a matter for you. And then, aside from any points that need clarification, the debate will be opened up to members of this panel. And then once we've had sufficient time to debate that, we will return to you, Councillor Nixon, or Councillor Beer, in terms of any summing up you'd like to do. Again, another 5 minutes to you for that. And if the cabinet member wishes to respond, equally up to another 5 minutes. And then if there are any recommendations, we'll deal with that then. So 5 minutes. Would you like a 1 minute warning, as usual?
Yes, please, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Darcy. Good afternoon, members and officers. Thank you for giving Councillor Mrs Beer and I an opportunity to present the petition that was back in March 23 that we formally submitted to the council, but they preceded that by a couple of months of actually gathering names in Plympton Ridgeway, following a decision made by Councillor Mark Shayer as the Cabinet Member for Finance to review and modernise car parking policy in the city. And members, it started by a little advert in the Evening Herald, which effectively was the starting gun for consultation in August of the previous year. And following our representations at that point, I think indeed Councillor Darcy, you were part of the representation I made. We never ever had a response from the council or an engagement whatsoever in terms of our representations for the car parks in Plympton. Now, Councillor Mrs Beer and I are asked today is for you members please to consider making recommendations, one for the council to publish the risk assessment that was conducted at the time prior to the implementation of revised arrangements in the car parks, for the council to now conduct, because I don't believe and see no evidence that this has happened, to conduct a risk assessment on the impact to adjoining facilities, their healthcare facilities, doctor surgeries. The district nurse is serviced by a building adjacent to the car park. The impact on Harewood House and the grounds, the sports facilities, which are leased but council owned. So there's an impact on Harewood House. Also on the local schools, Old Priory, St Mary's Infants and Plympton Academy, and also the neighbouring residential areas. So that whole scenario should have had a risk assessment as to what the impact would be. And thirdly, our ask is that whilst that's being undertaken, that the committee consider seeking the cabinet member, Councillor Coker, to suspend the current arrangements until such time as there's been proper and adequate scrutiny and those risk assessments have been properly conducted and properly assessed. And for that suspension to take place, Councillor Darcy, until such time as it comes back before this panel for further scrutiny in January, February, possibly in 2024. So I've given a bit of background and I've just set out what we would like you to consider making in the way of recommendations. As you will be aware yourself, Chair, but I'm sure many members here will be aware that the car park serving what has to be, I would suggest, one of the best and most successful district shopping centres that exist in Plymouth, the Plimpton Ridgeway, is vital for the continuing success of that as a local district shopping centre. And I say that because if you evidence through the joint local plan, many of the district centres in this city have struggled over a number of years. We have few vacant shops at the moment, there's high footfall, and the impact that Councillor Share made in making this decision has had some impact both on the, I would suggest, on the number of people using Ridgeway, but on the way that people access Ridgeway Shopping Centre, and that impact, it does need to be assessed and does need to be taken into account. So Councillor Mrs. Beale obviously put a lot more detail on these points, but certainly we do collectively as councillors for Plimpton wish to see a way forward that actually in many ways ensures the council and the public work together. Rather than doing to people, the council should be embracing and taking the community with us. And what we've seen, and you know, I think it's important to emphasise that this in no way is Councillor Coker's doing.
That's 1 minute, Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Councillor Dawsey. This is in no way Councillor Coker's doing, because he wasn't the person that was responsible for the original decision. Neither Councillor Dreen. It was Councillor Share from a financial perspective that made these decisions without adequately, in my opinion, and in Councillor Mrs. Beard's opinion, of taking into account the impact. So I hope we can have a partnership between the council and the community rather than the previous conservative approach of actually just imposing things on the community, because that's not the way to operate local democracy. So thank you very much, Chair, for giving me an opportunity to introduce the petition, and Councillor Mrs. Beale will pick up from there. Thank you.
Just, sorry, Councillor Beale, sorry to cut you off, but as I said out at the beginning, under the normal circumstances in council, the petitioner organiser, as I set out, has 5 minutes, and then the cabinet member has 5 minutes to respond, and then we'll deal with the debate. That was how you chose to use it. You have 5 minutes together, but ordinarily
that's what you
it's
said.
a council petition, like we had recently with any petition in the council. It's the petitioners given 5 minutes to introduce. I'm happy with my discretion as chair to allow Councillor Beer to add to that, but the normal course, as I set out when I introduced the item, was that there's 5 minutes for the petitioner. That's the advice that I have from Democratic Support. But nevertheless, as chair, I'm happy to indulge. As much as I should say, this matter was supposed to be before this committee back in July, members. You will recall that I chose to use my discretion as chair to defer it to today rather than just accept a petition. So in order that you could attend and debate that, rather than just to receive the petition in your absence. So I appreciate, Councillor Beer, you may have perhaps prepared for longer, but if you could give me a brief summary of your speech, I will indulge that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Darcy, and thank you very much, panel, for letting us come in and democratically present this petition to you as two democratically elected representatives. I feel absolutely sorry for Councillor Mark Coker, who's having to pick up from a decision that was made by a very novice cabinet member at the time without consultation with residents or councillors in the Plympton area. And it's had an impact certainly on Plympton and the way people park there now. We find that nurses are now having to park in the main car park because people are parking in the clinic car park, so taking up their spaces so that they don't have to put their numbers, registration numbers, into machines. But nurses who are serving our community and delivering a good service are doing that. Not only are they having issues down at the clinic where the nurses work from, we're also having issues down at the Beacon practice at Mudgeway, where their car park is being used by shoppers and workers because they don't want to park in the car park and put their registration numbers into the machines. The machines are constantly faulty, Chair, and constantly myself and Councillor Nicholson are getting complaints from residents who are saying they're being fined by these machines because they haven't put in their numbers correctly. but they've got no way of proving whether they put their numbers in. And that's where it's failing at appeal stage, because without the proof, you get a fine. So it has caused major issues there. I mean, I could go on talking about the impact that this is having around the area, but I actually went around the businesses in Plympton this week in Ridgeway and spoke to many business owners and asked them about the car parking issues. And some said that it's working reasonable. Others are saying that it's causing problems. For example, if you want to get a prescription into the Boots chemist in the morning and you go back in the afternoon to collect your prescription, you can't. So where are you going to park? Are you going to park on the double yellow lines in the Ridgeway, causing issues there? Or are you going to park on-street parking around the Ridgeway or outside of our schools and our sports facilities?
That's 1 minute, please, Councillor Bear.
I think that's about all as much as I would say. I mean, it's just causing absolute chaos down there. I think we should suspend this until we look at this more deeply. And once again, we've got something enforced on us by a Conservative administration without little impact and thought to the people of Plympton. Thank you, Chair.
I'm grateful, Councillor Bear. Okay, so as I set out earlier, the process that I have before me, Cabinet Member, you were invited to respond, notwithstanding the remarks in respect of the decision made prior to you taking on the role. You have up to 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably one of the most bizarre situations that I've ever been in. That I'm here to talk about a petition on something that I made no decision upon, and the length of time that is taken to get here is really quite strange. I am grateful to the opportunity to come and listen to Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Bear, that they feedback what they've picked up. I'm not here today, members, to make a decision on what you would like me to do. That's for you to do. Mike Arthurton, who's the parking, marine and garage service manager, will be able to answer some technical questions that you might have. And I don't believe in leading a community down a committee down a particular route. So that is the prerogative of your committee chair to ask me to do whatever that they feel is appropriate. All I will say is that whatever the committee asks me to look at, I will look at in an open and transparent way, and find the facts to answer whatever decision that we make. And I think that's as much as I can do at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Coker. So I'm going to ask the officer, before I invite you, Councillor Hendy, to deal with some technical questions that came up in the petition, presenters for the petition, Councillor Beer and Councillor Nicholson. So if I can, Mike, deal with some of the points that were raised. So the first is the assertion that the machines are constantly faulty. Can you help the committee with an overview in terms of installation and daily working practices of the machines? I do have a few that's come across that Councillor Beer has raised. So can we deal with that in the first instance, and then we'll tick off the others that I made note of?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So in terms of, I think firstly just to say that we understand that being parking, it's an emotive subject. So in terms of the parking systems, we rely on systems, facts and data. The machines in Plympton and across all other districts and actually on street and car parks in the city all are effectively computers and talk to us and tell us when they have a problem. So we're able to look up at any time, as well as be alerted live time to when there is a fault on a machine, in addition to when staff go there. I can say that having looked at this the other day, we have not had any reported issues with the machines. Recently, we welcome if anyone feels there is a problem, please let us know. But one of the key things when we introduced this change was to ensure that customers were made aware of the change, having staff present to help people in using the machines and how they work, and for us to maintain an eye and oversight on the machines to help people through that process.
So before I move on to the other issue, sorry, Councillor Coker, could you just lean back? Thank you so much. You said that we haven't had any reports recently in terms of the machines being faulty. I appreciate the assertion was constantly faulty. The initial introduction of the scheme, there may be no faults recently, but has there been a significant number of faults, notwithstanding the assertion that it was constantly faulty? Not just recently.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the data to hand in terms of numbers, which I will happily produce any information to support this. I can say that since the schemes, not just at Plymouth but elsewhere, went live, we have not had significant issues at any location. There may have been isolated problems which I would need to look up and will happily report back on. That would be consistent with the sort of level of day-to-day challenges we have with parking across the whole city.
The next issue that was identified, for you members, I will bring you in a moment, but I want to make sure that we cover the technical points. Fines by machines. Can you assist the committee? Councillor Beer said there were a significant number of fines by machines. Can you give us an update since the installation to where we are now? Do you have that information today?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't brought information outside of what's in the report today. Again, I'm happy to provide further information around that. What I can talk about is in the context of when a fine would be issued in the car park. So this system is one which has been in place for several years. The initial site was the Crown Hill District Car Park, and is predominantly there to ensure a high turnover for the short stay parking for the local businesses that thrive on the churn of visitors. The reason somebody may receive a parking fine is if they have exceeded the time allocated to them. In the case of Plympton, it was increased from the original 2 hours to 3 hours, or whether they have not registered a session in the first place.
I'll share. I am a little disappointed. I emailed you about requesting that information in terms of number of fines issued. It's a point that Councillor Beer has suggested that it is a significant number of fines is what I noted. That information is going to have to be provided, please. The next issue is then obviously leading on from that. Councillor Beer said, and because of the technical failings, that appeals are failing at the appeal stage because people can't evidence it. Are you able to help the panel understand if any of those parking enforcements have been taken to appeal and being upheld or dismissed in respect of muchway parking? Because we're told by the presenter that appeals are failing because car park users are unable to evidence that they've paid the fee. Can you assist the committee in that respect?
Thank you, Chair. Not in terms of the numbers, which I can have supplied in a separate report. In terms of appeals, there is no payments that apply at the Plympton car parks. The PCNs are appealed on their individual merits, and we would have to report on the fines that have been issued, and in relation to the customer, the situation with each fine. I'm afraid I don't have that data to hand here, but I'll happily provide that information.
I think again that's important information. It's been suggested or proposed that there have been a number of appeals in respect of enforcement at Muchway, and we should be able to establish if that how many of those appeals have been in respect of Muchway, and whether they have been appeals upheld or dismissed. So we should know that information. So in addition to the amount of fines or enforcements issued, I would welcome the number of appeals issued also. I'm going to open it up to the rest of the committee before we come back. So I've got Councillor Hendy first.
So the question is to Councillor Beer. You were talking just now about picking up a prescription from the boots. Can you just give us is it a 2 hour and then you can't return again during the day, just so I can get an understanding around that? And I've got a couple more questions after, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hendy, for that question. It's a no return within 5 hours. So if you go up to Ridgeway in the morning at 10 o'clock, pop your prescription in, do a bit of shopping and disappear and want to come back again within that 5 hour period, you can't.
So around the consultation, there was no consultation. So as ward councillor, you had no interaction leading up to the decision at all?
No. So we wrote, and I'll be frank, we're in public, but I raised this in the Conservative group, and there was very little interaction with Councillor Share or Councillor Bingley at the time, and they wouldn't confirm really what was going to happen. It just got imposed on us whether you were a Conservative councillor or not.
And you're both long-term councillors out there, and I'm sure you've spoken to the traders on many, many occasions over many years, and you've never had any feedback that something perhaps that as drastic as this was needed?
So you're absolutely right. You know, we have been, you know, I've been councillor for 30 years, Terry for nearly 18 years. There has, over that period, over my period, there have been instances when people have parked and not used facilities. But in recent years, Councillor Handy, I've had no reports of any significant problem at all. That's been used as an excuse, but you know, I've not seen any practical demonstration of an issue existing that warranted this level of intervention.
Again, members, I'm delighted with the questions, but in terms of the petitioners, it's important that we only just seek clarification. If you've got a point of clarification with questions to the Cabinet member and, more importantly, the officer who will be able to provide technical responses if they are necessary. I have Councillor Poser.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I should declare this as an interest, but I'm a ward councillor, so obviously this is a particularly petition that's come forward. So I thank Councillor Beer and Nicholson for bringing this petition forward. I did pick up on a couple of aspects on your presentation, Councillor Nicholson, which relates to the petition itself, and that the petition is requesting that a full risk assessment and impact assessment is undertaken. So it kind of leads, and obviously, and when it's completed, if it's completed, it has been completed for it to be published. So my first question really is to the officers. I think was it Mike Atherton? Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Mike. What impact assessment has been undertaken prior to the introduction of this particular policy locally? So that's my first question, and that's linking into the briefing paper that's been produced and provided, which clearly shows comparison of customer parking sessions, which is obviously data which has been gathered, data that's been gathered while the actual meters have been in place. It doesn't show any usage of the car park prior to that because there would have been no equipment in place. So we can't really measure if there's been any displacement at all from this data. It's just showing usage during this new policy. So it's just really trying to understand a bit more around what assessment was undertaken prior to the introduction.
Thank you, Councillor. With the decision aspect, all of these decisions were subject to a quality impact assessment. In specific relation to the changes at the car park, it would not be normal practice that we would do a risk assessment based on the changes, which is bringing the car parks at Plympton in line with existing systems used across the city. Sorry.
Just a second. I think Councillor Ricketts will put you on the list. Just returning to that point, which was a further technical question, if I may, Councillor Poyser. The impact assessment, so risk assessment is the normal route, but an quality impact assessment would have been undertaken. And has that been published?
Thank you, Chair. The Equality Impact Assessment was published as part of the Cabinet decision to implement, to both consult on the changes and secondly to implement the changes on the 10th of November 2022.
Thank you. Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't normally speak on matters of Plimpton, but I have been using the car park rather a lot recently as I've been availing myself of osteopathic treatment, excellent osteopathic treatment on the Ridgeway. Fortunately, I've been able to park. The car parks have been busy, so if there hadn't been some sort of churn introduced, I wonder whether I would have been able to park easily, but there are always spaces, but not too many, so the car park is busy. So I'm actually wondering really what the problem is, because if you want to go there to use a facility, you want to be able to park. If it was full up with people who are parking there all day and not moving on, and this certainly used to happen in the Plymouth Broadway car park, then it causes a problem for people who want to go there for a particular purpose to use some of the facilities and resources. So I haven't seen a problem, and it seemed to work well, and the machines took my number and there wasn't an issue. What I did notice on several occasions, and it's been referred to, I think, by Councillor Nicholson, or might have been Councillor Beer, that on the Ridgeway itself, there was an awful lot of parking, which was not people displaying disabled badges. So it does strike me, with Councillor Coker listening maybe, and Councillor Larry's gone, that there could be some opportunity to raise some revenue on the Ridgeway itself by actually, booking the people who shouldn't be parking there unless they're displaying a disabled badge. And there were places available in the car park. Thank you.
Thank you for that observation. Councillor Poyser, I didn't realise you wished to ask a supplementary. We're not in full council, but I'll allow this and then I'll bring in the other speakers. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. It was in relation to the impact assessment itself, and it was just a further question on what is the content of that risk assessment or impact assessment on the local community. So when Councillor Nicholson refers to Harewood House, Lodge Way, etc., and the surrounding area, has any assessment been done of the impact on those areas prior to the implementation of such a parking scheme? Because it would, in my view, it would appear to be something we should be doing, certainly within those local communities where changes to parking policy could have an impact on local services and residents.
Thank you, Councillor. I sort of mentioned it's not an impact assessment is not a normal practice we would undertake in the introduction of a system such as this. And I think just stepping back, just to give context here as well, the reason that this was proposed to members originally is that we have an evidence base that shows it is a highly effective method to support local districts when it was introduced several years ago at Crown Hill, where people had a real problem to park, and supporting shops that thrive on local custom and the short stay high turnover. That system was introduced there. On the back of that, the success of that system, it was then introduced on street on Embankment Road in Catdown, and furthermore it was also introduced on Union Street for the small number of shops there. The reason the system was introduced was on that basis that it was not a revenue decision. It's free parking, but it's controlled free parking consistent with what you see at retail parks and other places to help ensure there's that churn of vehicles, and ultimately that is to support the local businesses who need that turnover. I forgot to say that. Apologies, I've completely missed what I was about to tell you then. But I just, oh, sorry, yes. The other thing which happened, a decision that was taken at the time, is the Plimpton Ridgeway had always, the short stay car parks had always been 2-hour maximum stays. One of the other changes that was introduced with this decision was to increase that to 3 hours, and then on top of that also allow blue badge holders a further hour on top of that. And just to clarify as well, the no return period in the car park is 2 hours. So once you've had a session, you must leave. You cannot return until 2 hours afterwards.
Okay, thank you. No return is 2 hours. I'm grateful for that clarification. I have members. I have quite a few. Councillor Hendy, I've got quite a few members still to discuss this matter, so I'd appreciate if we could try and keep your points, our queries, as brief as possible and not to stymie debate. Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair. It's going to be an unlikely alliance around the room. So I, as Councillor Mrs Beer knows, I'm a resident of Plymouth. Councillor Mrs Beer is my councillor. And that's why I moved there. And we're in a lot of the same Facebook groups. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to push back a little bit on this. From the beginning, when this parking was announced, you were against it in the Facebook groups, as I recall, before it had actually begun. And some people were. There was pressure in the Facebook groups to find out what was going on. But I'm surprised you haven't heard of support of the parking measures, because I have. I personally agree with you. The parking is better now than it was. I know of other people who think the same thing. I know personally people who think that. And I know that the split in the Facebook groups is now not anti this parking measure. There's actually quite a lot of support for it for the reasons that have been rehearsed. So I won't go into them. Many of the fines, there's a strong belief that it's down to people not understanding how to use the machine, and that there is still long stay parking. So I'm kind of going to echo Councillor Mahoney's question, which didn't get answered because we moved away from it. I'm not really sure if this really is a problem, or if, as you have expressed quite clearly, it's a hangover from a previous set of relationships. And I'd also like to know, if we did decide to have a big risk assessment and investigation into this car park, how much would that cost? So I think that's my question. Since Councillor Mahoney's question already exists, I'd like to know the cost implication of digging this all up.
Councillor Gilmore, I'm very grateful. So I'm not going to take the legacy previous administration relationships question. I think that's a bit of a moot point. Councillor Dr Mahoney raised an issue about people using disabled spaces and not having blue badges displayed, and I think Councillor Coker will need to deal with that in summing up. That is there infringements occurring, and should that be enforced to ensure that people are not abusing the system? In terms of any further risk assessment that has already been advanced, it's not something we would ordinarily undertake. But I'll leave that floating with Councillor Coker when he gets to sum up. But I recognise the points he raised. Thank you. Councillor Blight.
Thank you. My question was a point of clarification from the briefing paper, 4.5. I think it's been answered in terms of it's a 2-hour delay in terms of the return, but I just wanted to point out it is in the briefing paper. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful, and that's noted. Councillor Ricketts.
Just some comments really. I appreciate the presentation. It's fantastic to hear what's happening at a local level. I completely understand why this petition has come forward, because when parking machines appear, bad things happen down the line. So it might be okay now, but anyone that knows anything about parking knows that parking machines, there's people that will want them to turn into charging points. So I fully back this petition to remove these installed parking machines, because there's trouble down the track, and it's proactive leadership and representations that hopefully can get these parking machines removed. It's frustrating when there's a perfectly, in an isolated incident, as in certain parking areas, when there's no problem, there seems to be no rationale for this, apart from maybe future announcements about parking charges, which nobody wants. So I fully support the councillors proposing the petition and the people that signed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question, but I think I'm going to change it now. There's a free car park with a machine where you put your number plate, your car registration in Crown Hill, that's been there since 2011. And that's over 10 years ago. As far as I'm aware, there are no plans to start charging for Crown Hill car park. This strikes me as conjecture, but perhaps we could get some clarification on that. I'm not sure that by being asked to put your car registration plate in, that there are, you know, sinister plans ahead to actually start charging. What I was going to ask was about, I think Councillor Mrs. Beer, you mentioned that sometimes people are fined because they enter their car registrations incorrectly. So perhaps an ANPR camera would get around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I think Councillor Coker was noting as you were talking, so I'm sure he'll respond to those points in his summing up. Mike has already indicated that that information that perhaps could have assisted today will be forthcoming. And I will certainly be chasing that up. Because I too, there are no more speakers, so I'll come in at this point. I too have somewhat of a declaration of interest to declare as a Plympton councillor. Formerly in Plympton Earl and now in Plympton St Mary's, and part of the Conservative group who introduced the parking arrangements at Mudgeway. And whilst I absolutely echo the my observations, the lack of meaningful consultation, in my opinion, prior to the imposition of the parking arrangements, I very much, and as Plympton councillors will agree, there have been issues in these car parks previously, and we, those who know the history, have often had to deal with people sleeping overnight in said car parks, and I know certainly anecdotally that there's a lot of space blocking that used go on in Mudgeway, where people would use it as a commuter hub, and we as Plympton councillors I have had casework in respect of that previously. So the man in the van is something we've dealt with many times, and thankfully that's no longer the case. And space blocking is certainly something that it was a common occurrence where people would commute as far as Exeter and leave their car there. As a Plympton councillor, and these are observations, I too visit these car parks, and the litmus test for Plympton, the biggest event in Plympton is the Mayfair, which engages everything from the cricket club right up to the tennis facilities, the bowls, Harewood House, all the events on the Ridgeway, and it's a very busy part of the Plympton year. And I, like Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Beer, and attend various forums and groups in Plympton, and that was a real concern to see how the imposition of these parking arrangements would impact on that, and Councillor Nicholson made reference to that in terms of the impact, the wider impact, Harewood House, etc. And there were other events that I could draw attention to, a cricket club, a reopening of the new facilities, etc. And I was quite pleased to see, even on Mayfair, I availed of parking space almost outside Harewood House. So my observations are similar to Dr. Mahoney and similar to you, Councillor Gilmore, in that as a regular user of that part of the world, because we represent it, and it, you know, both our wards border it in terms of Ireland and St Mary's, and Chadderwood is significantly affected by it also. I see the impact as being a positive one. The business owners that I talk to, they're saying, you know, there's no direct correlation. Whenever I go there, and I appreciate this is anecdotal, Councillor Gilmore, but there are spaces. I've never not needed a space. That said, I have had residents contact me around or close to Mudgeway in particular, within St Mary's, who are attributing a displacement as a result of the imposition of the machines. Now, again, that's anecdotal. We need further information and further investigation before we can actually attribute it to that being the case. So, and I guess the only point I'll make at this stage is that whilst, like any imposition, parking still remains free, if it turns out that the imposition of these machines does exactly what they were described to do. Keep spaces available, stop space blocking, making sure the free parking provision in Plympton remains, which is for ward councillors, independents, Green and Conservatives, I understand, are insisting that remains free parking for Plympton Mudgeway car parks. If the imposition of this machinery or these arrangements ensures that that is the case, well, that's to be deemed as a positive move. If, however, if it's negatively impacting on the displacement and or it becomes an opportunity to start charging, well then Plympton councillors and residents of Plympton would be very much against that. And I wonder, as I said at a meeting only a couple of months ago, if we're still too early in the process to be able to truly understand the true impact and the wider implications of any displacement. But again, anecdotally, and I'm saying this to you, Councillor Coker, when you consider your summing up and how you might monitor this going forward, I have identified what I think or what I know as a councillor of that area to be the busiest points, like Mayfair and any big event. And when I go and look at the car parks, there are spaces available. And if the furore about this, you know, displacement and chaos, which is a word that we've heard a few times, if that is the case, well, it doesn't correlate with my observations. Now, notwithstanding, I certainly agree with Councillor Nixon and Councillor Beer that the imposition of the scheme wasn't properly consulted. It wasn't explained properly, and there were quite a few teething problems with the signage, with the machines itself, and even the date when it would start. I recall there was confusion over when that would start, despite what had been published. But I'd like to think now that we've had some time to bed in, and in due course we'll have a data sample that we can look back on, and information like any fines being issued or any appeals would be helpful, but I think we might be still too early in that process. So I think it's been a really good discussion, lots of points and observations. I'm going to pass over to Councillor Nicholson. You have 5 minutes, Councillor. If you wish to share some of that 5 minutes with Councillor Beer, you of course can do. And then I'll come back to the officers and cabinet member, as I said earlier. Over to you, Councillor Nicholson.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Darcy, and thank you, members, for a good debate. The ask that I introduced the contribution on is still there, and I think members should take very seriously the fact that Mr. Arthurton, on behalf of the council, has said that no risk assessment was undertaken, because legally you need to undertake a risk assessment. You should have a safe system of work. You should effectively have a safe system for people to go to the machine, and the way that the reconfiguration has taken place in the car, but you've got one little area that is being coned off or hatched off for people to walk, but there is no safe passage. If you go in a city centre car park, there's safe passages for people to walk around a car park. Now, I don't have to be going to the Ombudsman because the council's not done a risk assessment, because it is a legal responsibility. So I'd hope, at the very least, councillors and this scrutiny panel would be seeking from the cabinet member a risk assessment to be undertaken on the 3 car parks in Mudgeway. But this was a policy that the officer had to implement for councillor share on all car parks affected by the modernisation programme. The impact, I would say through you, Chair, Councillor Gilmore, Councillor Dr Mahoney raised, well, what is the issue? Well, you obviously don't know Plympton as well as we do, and following your point, Councillor Darcy, if you'd attended some of the local community council meetings and the Plympton Surrey Neighbourhood Forum meetings and listened to residents, they are concerned about the impact on council facilities at Harewood House and on the doctors' facilities. And, you know, obviously Councillor Gilmore's a Plympton resident, but I'm not sure how often you would go to Harewood House. But if you go to those facilities, you go to the Beacon Medical Centre, you will see car parking is very, very congested. And what this policy's done is taken some of the people from short stay into long stay, and some of those that can't then park in long stay, to those other areas where there's no enforcement at all. And therefore you've got bowlers that can't necessarily park, tennis players and others. So there is an impact, and the council should, for their own sake, as an asset holder of Harewood House, seeking to want to maximise the revenue of that facility, actually want to know what the impact is on it, on the council facility. So an impact assessment, I think, is important, and I'd hope members would seek to ask Councillor Coker for that also. And as you rightly say, Chair, you know, there is a period in this, and perhaps, well, I certainly would recommend that you actually do look at this again in the new year, hopefully with a bit more evidence, and those questions you've posed to Mr. Arthurton, to review it again. But my concluding remarks would be that what Councillor Share didn't take into account, and what perhaps new members of this committee won't take into account, that the Chief Executive, and indeed Mr. Northey in his current role, every budget round will put car parking charges at district shopping centres on the list. Now, Councillor Coke has been there before. I hope he would see it on a list of options that are presented by officers to look at revenue for the council. That has consistently been the case as I've had cabinet responsibility. That will be the case in the future. And that's the overriding concern, as Councillor Ricketts quite rightly raises, that you put the machines in, it's easy to make them chargeable, and that'll have a massive impact on the district shopping centre. But what shouldn't be, what Councillor Share didn't take into account, that putting this in has put cost into the car parking department unless it's netted off by fines income. So if you want to reduce costs, thank you, if you want to reduce costs, you wouldn't normally have implemented such a policy, because all you're doing is making it more costly to operate car parks. Thank you, Chair, thank you, members, and I look forward to your conclusions.
I'm grateful. Before I invite the Cabinet Member and Officer in to sum up, just on a point of clarification, Councillor Nicholson, as a member of the Plymouth forums, I certainly did attend those meetings and listen to residents' concerns, and you were at the same meetings, so I'd just like that noted for the record. Councillor Coker, would you like to provide a response, please?
Thank you, Chair. I found it very interesting to listen to two sets of an argument where there was no agreement on is it a problem, isn't it a problem. I just want to say that every car park that we operate has a risk assessment associated with it so it can operate as a car park safely. So we need to get that myth out of the environment that it doesn't exist. It does. And every car park has got that one. We talk, Councillor Ricketts said it's a cash cow, in other words. You put in controls to do it, and that will be the opening gates for parking charges. I was involved in the one in Crown Hill all those years ago because traders were saying people were parking there all of the time and they were losing business. I'm not here to say if this decision was right or wrong. I'm here to do what the scrutiny panel decide. But where I also introduced it on Union Street, because businesses were really struggling and people were parking there all day, and and it's worked well there. I can only give you an objective view of how I see it. We have got now, this council goes from Conservative to Labour and back again and back again. This administration has never, despite various criticisms, put car parking charges in our district centres, and nor, in all fairness, have the Conservative Party when they've been in charge. We value our district centres, but we have an ability to manage our district shopping centres to allow churn. This is what we try and do. The next thing that I will say to Councillor Mahoney, I will never, ever support non-disabled people parking where they shouldn't. We will take that on board And between parking our civil enforcement officers, we can look at that, because people have disabled badges for a reason, and we shouldn't be discriminating against them, where if people are parking there, they shouldn't be. So that's one thing that we will take on board today. I will review whatever you, as a panel, ask me to do. What I would say, where we're in a process of doing something slightly different in my ward, we've been back and looked at parking, looked at how we're doing it, because I don't believe that it settles down until 12 months of operation, because people do need to get used to it and understand it. All right. But these are my observations, because it would be much easier for me to be able to defend a decision that I made in the first place. But I'm trying to give you a balanced and cooperative viewpoint here. And, you know, you, the committee, asked me what you'd like me to do.
Thank you, Councillor Coker. I was very pleased to hear you repeat your opening remark. You said that you will do whatever scrutiny decides. That's really encouraging. And as you closed, you also said something similar. So that's great news. I'm glad the administration is going to do exactly what scrutiny decide. In relation to... No, we'll hold you to that. Okay, so look, members, you've heard from the petition and really good debate. I think Councillor Coker is absolutely right. There is certainly views in who oppose the imposition period, views who are of the mindset that the imposition of these parking arrangements are presenting difficulties, not only on the retailers, but on residents abutting to the car parks. And then, of course, during the debate, you've heard views to the contrary, that it's helping, it's working. As I said in my remarks, and having the knowledge, like Councillor Nixon, Councillor Beer and Councillor Poyser, the anecdotal, I accept, observations are that it seems to be working, and we've heard other members say that also. I agree very much with the comments made about there would be significant costs of the imposition of such a scheme, and more importantly, the significant costs to remove such a scheme before we even know whether the scheme is helping or exacerbating a situation, or not even dealing with a situation that did or didn't occur. And I wouldn't be making a recommendation that anything's removed without we knowing whether it's actually worth the cost of removing said arrangements. So what I'm, in summarising the debate, what I'm proposing we take forward as a recommendation is that we certainly need to look at this again, where we've got a longer data sample, a longer period to reflect on. At the moment, and today, frustratingly, we didn't have the information in terms of any enforcements or any appeals, which is what the petitioners suggested. So I think the next time we look at that, if members are minded to agree a recommendation to that effect, is that we bring this back to be able to see what impact the parking arrangements has had on the Ridgeway and all the points that's been discussed through the petition. So we can properly...
Chair, can I make a point of order, please?
Of course you can.
In the, you talk about the petitioners asking for a list of fines and appeals, and it's not actually in the petition?
Just on in response to the point of order, I asked that because the petitioners introduced it as part of their presentation. So as it was in Chair's discretion, as I tried to encourage democracy and allow Councillor Beard to talk as well as a co-petitioner, I took some of the points that she raised and in my capacity allowed that to filter into debate. But they're valid points and they need to be explored. And I had raised these myself prior to today because I thought that data would be useful for the debate, because members, I'm sure, will want to know about that. So I think it is important, but I note your point. So members, what I'm going to suggest as a recommendation is that this is brought back to scrutiny at the next opportunity, which will be in the new year now, because we have budget scrutiny. February, I'm being told, which arguably will give us almost 12 months in terms of the imposition of the scheme, which might then enable even further debate to see if, hey, is this working? Has it caused a problem? Has it dealt with a problem? Was there a problem? We'll have more of an analysis. Councillor Hendy, you wanted to come in, but that's my recommendation to you as chair.
Is there any way, whilst this scheme is operational, that we can still have an engagement with the public to see how they actually feel about it now, so we can get a live feedback? I don't know if that's legal, but
Yeah, so what we could do, I'm being advised, is that we could do some work in advance of February, so we could have that wider consultation. Now, as been discussed in this debate, Councillor Beer, Councillor Nixon, and myself, Councillor Poyser, we all sit on various groups that are engaged in Plimpton matters, and this particular issue is discussed at all of those debates, and they have tried to consult with the process, so their views could be sought. We could understand better the impact on Harewood House, but again, all we have to date is anecdotal evidence. So what we hear, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of what you're presenting, but even my own anecdotal observations, I'm not counting the spaces, I'm exploring the car parks on busy days. So we might be better placed in February with the assistance of Mike Atherson to have more than anecdotal information, so when we can discuss this again. So I'm proposing that we bring this back. There's no need for a further petition, but we add it to our agenda and bring it back at the next scrutiny, which will be after budget scrutiny, so February, so we can have this discussion again, unless you tell me that's completely ultra vires and not within my gift at all. Okay. So that's what I'm proposing, members. I'm going to ask if you're happy to second that, but I notice Councillor Ricketts, if you could.
Or we could just do what the petition wants us to do. Could we not proceed with how the petition has got together? They've asked us to do something. In my humble opinion, it would be fantastic to support that and see democracy in action, rather than put it off. I think 6 months has been a good window of opportunity to see how things work. Why don't we just agree to the petition?
Through you, Chair, the petition says, we the undersigned call on Plymouth City Council to remove the recently installed car parking machines at Ridgeway Shopping Centre car parks. Now, that is not something that this committee can decide to do. Whilst you may wish to make a recommendation to the cabinet member to undertake that, then we would need to obviously go through the usual decision-making processes. But that's not something that this committee can do.
What I'm trying to do is to make sure.
I agree with what Ross is saying. I know we can't make the decision. It would be our recommendation to go with the petition.
Well, that would be subject to a vote.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. So you have a motion on the floor to bring this back in February. You would need to dispose of that motion before we took another.
Well, I think my motion is the most sensible and practicable way to proceed. There is not, apart from anecdotal observations, there is not sufficient information before this committee to make a decision that's in the best interests of not only the residents in Plimpton, but the local authorities' finances and the implications of its car parking policy across the organisation. So my recommendation to this committee is that this is brought back on the agenda for the first available meeting, which I understand is February. And I'm going to invite committee members to vote in respect of it. I need a seconder, sorry, I'm being asked for it. Thank you, Councillor Gilmore. So that's now been put to the floor. I'm inviting you members to vote whether you're in favour of that being added to the agenda. If you could please indicate by hands, that would be very helpful. Those against, please. And abstention.
Abstaining in line of what I said previously.
Thank you. And Councillor Stillman noted you didn't take part in the discussions or the vote. Thank you. Thank you. That's passed. Thank you. Councillor Beer, Councillor Nixon, I'm very grateful for you presenting today. Thank you for attending. Thank you.
Could I just make a small recommendation? You asked for data on the for the February meeting on fines collected. Can I just make a recommendation that the fines are delineated as to whether they're fines because no ticket was sought or fines because the parker overwent the 3-hour parking.
Absolutely. I'm very keen that we have adequate, relevant data for us to make a proper decision. So the officers will be drilling down and presenting this committee with as much information to help us with that decision. Thank you. Members, I'm not in favour of prevaricating matters, but we have been sat here for 2 hours. Can I invite you to take a comfort break for 10 minutes? Thank you. All right, members, thank you very much. I appreciate Councillor Ricketts and Councillor Tofan are not back in the room, but I was very clear, and I thought I've been very clear in all of my directions today. 10 minutes is 10 minutes. Very warm welcome, Chief Executive Tracy Lee and Councillor Sudan. Next agenda item was suggested. The last time we met, members, we identified a number of risks and we discussed a number of risks, and one of those risks was risk number 25, which dealt with the use of interim staff, particularly at senior level. And you may recall it was Councillor Lowry, in accordance with our minutes, encouraged the committee to invite the chief exec. So it was Councillor Lowry who threw you under the bus. As long as you know, there we are, it's a matter of record. And it was a recommendation to invite the chief exec to the Performance, Finance and Customer Focus Overview and Scrutiny Committee to discuss the scale of senior interim posts, as detailed in the Risk Register 25, significantly focusing upon the HR issues surrounding workforce delivery and the staff absence, including short and long-term sicknesses, and the impact interim posts was having upon the council's budget. So, Tracy, over to you in terms of, and I know we've discussed this only recently at full council, in terms of amendments to our structures, but I think it would be very helpful for members, as Councillor Lowry suggested, which we all agreed, would be a useful update to this committee on our usage of interim posts and what we're doing as an organisation, considering its risk rated status. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm absolutely delighted. I don't feel like I've been thrown under the bus. It's lovely to see you all. So I'm feeling like I put my hand up and the bus has stopped, so that's absolutely fine. And what I will say is I put that risk on the corporate risk register because we have got a number of vacant posts within the senior management team, the top 3 layers of the council at the moment. So carrying that level of vacancies for permanent members of the team is clearly a big risk. It's a big risk in terms of the delivery of the programme for the council and our ability to have the capacity to work with our partners across the city. So that's why the risk is on the risk register. In terms of mitigation of the risk, the first thing to say is that, in looking at the reasons why people have left, and we've got 6 vacancies at the moment, there is no pattern. There's no problem from that point of view. People have left because they've got promotions. People have left because they want to be closer to home. We have made 1 person redundant as a result of the budget savings from last year. So there are a variety of reasons why people have left the organisation. I put my hand on my heart and say they are genuine. They're genuine reasons for people leaving. The first thing we've done as a result is clearly look at those posts and look at the best ways of covering them and making sure we've got capacity. Some of those posts are statutory posts, so we do need people in post to deliver those services. And we've done that, and I would absolutely agree that the level of interim cover in the organisation at the moment is too high, but it is at the level I would say it needs to be in order to make sure that our statutory posts are covered and we have capacity to be able to do the priorities that we have for the organisation. And we've done that in a variety of ways. We have brought in interims, and the Chief Officer's Appointments Panel is responsible for recruitment of all senior Chief Officer interims within the council. Not only does the appointment process go through, but actually they do sign off on the pay levels as well. And what I would say to you is that it's a very, very aggressive market for recruitment of interims. And pay levels are quite eye-watering in the market, and that is a factor of the market at the moment. It is an employee-led market. It's important that we have those interims for the minimum amount of time, the right amount of time, but the minimum amount of time. For some of those interims are in until we recruit a permanent. So, for instance, we have an interim DCS who will be with us until we recruit a permanent DCS, because we have to have a DCS by law. So that's why some of the lengths of those interim arrangements are variable depending on recruitment. So getting interims in, we've also, and Chief Officers Appointments Panel again, have looked at other arrangements. Some of them are acting up arrangements where internal members of staff have very kindly taken the mantle and agreed to act up and take on extra responsibilities. And again, the Chief Officers Panel have to go through a process to make sure that we've got the right person in the right place for those posts. Parallel to that, we have got 6 senior posts out to advert at the moment, and we are just seeing people. We are encouraging people to apply. We want as good a field as possible. But as I say, that market is pretty tight at the moment. So this will be the second time we're out for a strategic service director for education, and we've second time out for our director of resources. So 2 posts that are pretty tricky to fill. We're using a variety of recruitment agencies. They headhunt, they phone people. They try not to pester them because that's not a good way of encouraging them into a process. Myself and the cabinet member have seen a number of candidates before they even submit an application. So we're doing everything we can to sell Plymouth, sell the city, sell the jobs, and sell being here and being part of this great city and this great team. So that work is underway at the moment, and I know the Chief Officers Appointments Panel have got a number of dates held in their diaries for recruitment interviews, subject to us being able to have panels, being able to bring forward successful candidates to the panel. In terms of the future, I think one of the things that Pamela Moffat, who is our interim service director for HR and OD, is doing is looking at a more appropriate approach for succession planning. We do have we've had some very successful succession plans in the organisation in the past, where we've grown talent within the organisation and they have stepped up into new roles. And actually, by people stepping up into roles now, you can see some of that succession planning happening. But we need to be far more intentional about the way we do that, and how we have that right combination of growing our own talent, but also looking for new and fresh blood, fresh ideas to come into the organisation. So Pamela is helping us think about the way we do that. And then there's another piece of work that we're doing and we're testing out actually with the 6 posts that we are currently out to advert, and that is how we refresh our brand as an employer, the way we refresh our narrative about what it's like to work in the city. And we've got some absolutely great short videos actually from members of our staff saying what it is, why they like working for the City Council. They are absolutely great. So if you go onto our website, you'll see recruitment, and you'll see short videos of people who work for the council saying what it's like to work for us. And I think it's pretty good actually. So do have a look at those, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and Cabinet Member may want to say a few words too.
Sue, did you want to come in at this stage?
I think Tracy has probably covered off most of it. I think the other thing is that we are working with Destination Plymouth and Amanda Lumley as well at looking at the city, because we're not the only large organisation in the city that has recruitment issues. And so we are working at, we've talked to the NHS and other big employers about how we can show that the city is a place that you want to come and work. So that's another piece which will also support everybody across the city and not just the City Council. But we're very much aware of the need to do what we can to fill some of these gaps permanently, because not having the level of stability in the council is a risk, let alone the cost.
I'm looking at scribbles. I'm somewhat conflicted because I sit on the Chief Officer Appointment Panel, so I've been privy to a lot of these conversations. But it was right that we had this discussion last time. There are an awful lot of risks, as Councillor Dan's just identified, and Tracy. But there's a cost as well. There's a cost to recruitment, and we're going out to recruit again. So these are the points we discussed last time, just to jog your memory. And it's important that you, as this scrutiny panel, feel that you have sufficient information to make sure that you've got enough to help you monitor that risk going forward as well. because when we run through the risk register, it's often a bit of a canter sometimes, depending on what stage it features in the agenda. So I'm looking now, Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you, Tracy and Sue. I understand you might not be able to give me an exact figure. Can you roughly tell the committee how much extra the interims we've got are costing than they would if they were permanent members of staff? Is that a rough figure you'll be able to give us?
I would have to come back to you with that precise figure. It certainly is more, but of course interims do not, they're not on part of the pension scheme, so we save on pension and we don't pay them when they don't work. So it's not a straight comparison. We have to, it doesn't quite work like that, but we can come back with what the difference in the pay bill for September is, or August. We'll come back and give you a figure. I think it's really important though that we do not want to be in a position of having interims. The sooner, no matter how great they all are, they're working well, they're working with us, but we want to get to a position of having permanent members of staff as soon as we possibly can. And Mr. Northey monitors that very closely with me, so that we are driving that forward. No, I think there's definitely. So what we'll do is we will break it down, because there's acting up arrangements are different to having interims in. If in terms of those acting up arrangements, it will be the difference between the salary the person's on now and what our permanent member of staff would be. So I won't include those. It is purely for agency sourced interims. That's the figure we could give you.
I think it's important to say, though, that you can't judge the importance of having an interim when it's in a statutory post, or if it's having an interim that is carrying out work and functions of the council that have to go on. Because if you don't have somebody doing the work, you're actually putting the risk into a different place of not being able to function. So it is not just a financial thing that we have to look at. We also have to look at the risk of not paying.
Yes, please.
Thank you for that. And it is just purely to see because we've mentioned it as a budgetary issue, what the budget pressure is from the industry. So it's just so we can see the data in front of us. Thank you.
Councillor Gosling.
Thank you very much, Chair. So you've highlighted the issues in attracting external appointments to some of these key roles. What has the council got in place of internal training and support in order to get more internal candidates for these roles, develop their roles?
So once again, we have got training and development programmes. What I would say is that there is more work we're going to do, and again, Pamela Moffat's one of her priorities while she's with us is to review that management and leadership development programme that we have. The amount of work we've done on that has fallen off in the last few years, and we need to get that back and back working, so that we've got talent. We're growing talent at all levels in the organisation. So I'm sure Pamela would be able to come and present to you on the work she's done at a future stage. But what I'd say is there's definitely more to do. Everybody has a performance appraisal and a development plan. So as part of that development plan, there's a conversation about career aspirations, how people want to develop their careers, and opportunities that we can give people to help grow their talent, give them opportunities. And sometimes that might be just extending the work that they're doing. Sometimes it's putting them on a course or a training programme, particularly perhaps within a technical field. We've had people in the past doing aspiring chief exec programmes, which is great. So actually how we bring people forward. But again, what we want to do is to refresh that and be far more intentional about the way we approach it.
Whilst we're waiting for other hands to rise, this is something we've discussed in the Chief Officer Appointment Panel, and it's right that members of this committee should be appraised of that. Succession planning and growing organically growing the talent for the future. It's a fine balance, because you develop a member of our team to the point, and if there's a ceiling, that member of the team is going to get frustrated and think, well, look, I've had all of this investment in me as an individual, not financially, all this development talent, and I can't go anywhere, so I'm going to go off for the next opportunity. And Plymouth is not, the issues in recruitment is not exclusive to Plymouth. Every local authority have got a number of these senior positions to fill, so it is a very competitive market. And I guess certainly from a committee's perspective, whilst we have these conversations in other meetings, maybe Pam coming back in February at the next meeting to help provide an overview of what's been undertaken since Pam joined us might be useful, and that's something we can discuss later. But I think it's the reassuring, because as I think it was Councillor Storman talked about the finances, we're looking at the budget, more or less the first thing of this agenda item, and we're looking at the budget in December and trying to forecast out. It's one of the significant pieces of work this committee will do. And the reliance, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in interims, which are more expensive, but we need them. It's about at what point will we get where we can be developing and growing and retaining. Recruiting is difficult, but more expensive. It's the retention. It's that kind of reassurance. Now, Pam might be able to give us that at the next meeting to let us know what's been going on, but this was the opportunity to have this discussion in public, that there's a real concern about not just the financial implications to the organisation about recruiting, retaining, losing talent, but it's also to the employees of the organisation. There's an employment benefit of those individuals being retained. And you talked about the videos that are on the website where our teams are saying how great it is to work here, and everybody receives an exit interview. But at that senior level, are we going down further? Could we go down further to understand, is it a ceiling that's causing this individual to leave the department, or is it finances? And if we can't compete with that, so be it. But the ceiling, I think, could be the flexible linchpin. We don't know that, so it'd be useful just to plant that thought process. Councillor Dan.
I need to say that some of the things that have already happened is that, if you remember when we were at full council, we had the pay statement, and within that we changed the way that we were paying and grading our apprentices, so that we can have apprentices throughout the organisation on any pay grade, so it's commensurate with the job that they're doing, and also putting in an extra couple of pay bands at the top of the scale to stop senior leaders leaving the council for better jobs, when we can actually give them a much better value added job. So it is about money, but it's also about recognition and acknowledgement. And I think you're absolutely right. And when you look at the videos, they're not all senior level videos. There are operational videos as well of people lower down in the pay scale of the organisation who have been here for many years and have the value of working for a public service in local government as part of the job. So yes, I think that's sort of been addressed as well.
I suppose it's about the interim officers and strategic directors. So what is it that makes the interims more expensive than the permanent ones? And is it possible, does it ever happen that some of the interim officers do actually become permanent?
So what makes them more expensive is the market. If the market for interims, if there's not many around, then market pay, it's market rates. Yes, sometimes people decide they love us so much they can't stay away, and we very often we love that. We'd love it if people come to us permanently. Interim work is quite different to permanent recruitment, and just in terms of transparency, actually, and I know this is often an issue for us in the organisation. If you advertise an interim job, you will very often attract a certain type of person who is there wanting to do interim work, short-term work, wanting to get paid the higher level, not worrying about their feeding. Might have a private pension, they'll go into a different pension pot, but knowing that if they're not in work, they don't get paid, but being able to take jobs for particular periods of time, then maybe have time off. So it suits certain people during their careers. permanent work is a very different thing. So actually, when you advertise a permanent job or you advertise an interim, there are slightly different pools of people that you will attract into that market.
Supplementary, if I may. Thank you. That's helpful. It's a lot of you probably know this already, but I think it bears asking the question for the sake of those watching the stream online, because a lot of people don't understand local government finance. And I guess as well, because of our budget and having to manage this tightly, and it's already been discussed, you know, we have to keep an eye on the bottom line. Suppose we're not really in a position to offer things like labour market supplements, or is that something that could possibly be considered? Would that outweigh the cost of constantly recruiting interim officers?
So we've done several things over the last few years. The first thing we did, which was a big change, is that chief officers, there's now a band by which you can recruit a chief officer. And chief officer's appointments panel decides where on that band. Before it was almost a spot point, and it was more tricky. Now there is a band, and the band shifts with pay rises. So that's just helpful, and it's a tool that can be used. We also do have a system of market factor supplements, which is, I think, what you're talking about, where if we can't recruit, we will look at the market and say, what's happening in the market in terms of that particular role, and where do we need to position to be able to compete. I do have to say, for some industries, we will never be able to compete with that. So that comes down to, why do people work in local government? And it's the hearts and minds. Why are we here? We're here to serve our public, our residents. And you know, that's we're not charity. You know, people don't work for us for charity purposes, but actually that sense of, why do people come to local government? Why do they work in local government? And why do they stay in local government? But when many could go, particularly into the private sector, and earn a huge amount. So that sense of rewards in other ways is important. And that's why being really thoughtful and recognising the good work that our teams do. We don't always get it right, but recognising the good work and actually that ethos that people are here to deliver really good public services. So the market factor supplement is in place. And also under the pay policy statement, you also agreed some extra bands at the top of what we call the NJC, which is the generality of staff. And again, that was because the way in which market factor supplements work is they're reviewed every 2 years. If you come into an organisation and you say, well, this is your base salary, and this is your top up for 2 years, and then we're going to review it in 2 years. People were saying, oh yeah, but will you give it to me in 2 years' time? And so it's actually that certainty, those extra bands within the pay rate are helping, and they're already, we think, helping in terms of retaining people who could just, you know, walk out here on a Friday and walk into a job on a Monday, because they are highly sought after. Sue, I don't know if you want to.
I was just going to add, for equality issues, it's much more transparent, putting people onto a pay scale rather than giving them market supplement.
And just on that, Sue, you're absolutely right. And if you join the organisation at 16 months into that 2-year market supplement award, within a few months of you joining the firm, you might find out that you've discovered that it hasn't been renewed, and you've come here on a salary which will no longer be offered. So absolutely right. I don't have any other members on the list. Thank you so much for attending. I'm acutely aware that you were kept waiting with quite a long agenda. It's really interesting. As I say, I'm quite privileged to be on the Chief Officer Appointment Panel, so I've heard a lot of this debate. It's something that impacts greatly on our city's finances, and it's important that members of this committee are able to scrutinise that properly. So I'm very grateful, and it's more encouraging also to hear how happy our staff are from the floor up, to use that analogy. Good to hear that feedback. And too right. We don't want to encourage too many people to move down here. We kind of like this, but we want the right kind of people down here. Thank you so much for attending. I think we quite like it being a bit of a secret down here. All right, next on the agenda, members, we have policy briefing. It's not my intention to repeat the content of the policies, it's there for your reference, and I invite you to note the briefing on the new bill to modernising the business rate system, and the briefing to consider adding proposals brought by the current administration to the work programme to the committee.
Kevin's online.
Oh, sorry, Kevin's online, I didn't realise that. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Hi, Kevin, welcome. Apologies, we've been keeping you waiting. It's been a long agenda and quite a lot of debate. Thank you very much for providing these policy briefings. I had the opportunity to read them last week, and I'm sure members have read them in advance of today's meeting. Members, unless there's any questions for Kevin, no. Kevin, thank you so much for attending. Content is noted, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon stroke evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, next agenda item, the work programme. Agenda item 10, we're getting there. Okay, so we need to look at our work programme going forward. Ross, can I hand over to you now, please? And you can lead this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, members will know that every year we undertake a budget scrutiny process. Usually that budget scrutiny process takes place in January. This year, the proposal is to bring forward that budget scrutiny process into December. That follows advice from the Centre for Public Scrutiny, who reviewed our scrutiny function last year, and that of our LGA peer review also in 22-23. I've circulated a project initiation document, so that was just with you at the start of this meeting, so apologies for the delay in respect to that one. I think what you'll see there is we've clearly highlighted the fact that we've made amendments to the 23 scrutiny process following the Centre for Public Scrutiny feedback. The LGA peer review came back in February of this year, just after our scrutiny process, and received good feedback in reference to it. So we're trying not to change things too much. However, clearly, as you've heard today, both through the finance monitoring report and the performance report, there are some challenges facing us going forward. So we've tried to focus on those areas which currently represent probably the biggest risks to delivery of services at the council, and would invite you to agree that as an outline approach to budget scrutiny for the 24-25 budget. The proposal is it takes place in the early part of December. We'll be very clear about the required documentation as we previously have been. I think we're looking at a membership of around 13. The chair of this committee traditionally chairs the budget scrutiny process. 13 has been used as a number previously, and it allows us to apply proportionality to the budget scrutiny process. So, Chair, for discussion on this particular item, does the proposal as set out work for members? And if it does, and we're comfortable to move forward, we'll make contact with group whips and independent and green groups in reference to membership. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ross. I appreciate members haven't had a chance to assimilate all of the paper that came around this afternoon. But I very much agree. In order, this is a seismic task. In order to properly scrutinise the budget, we have to make sure that we got proportionality in terms of political parties. So 13 is the right number, and I accept that I would ordinarily chair it in my capacity to chair this panel. Day 1, day 2 sessions have been broken up. That's in your paper. I very much advanced that on the basis that they're drafted with such a degree of flexibility. There might be something that we as a committee would like to spend more time dealing with, or it may not even be in there yet. So it's not cast in stone that this is all we're looking at. we will have some flexibility leading up to it. I guess whilst I'm happy to propose this, the alarm bell for me is that it's proposed that we do this on the 6th and 7th of December. So it's not just those 2 days. There will be some pre-meeting reading where we will be inundated with information. So we're not looking for, I know you're all keen. I can see the many hands jumping up and down saying, please, 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 put me on this committee, budget scrutiny. We will speak to the various groups, leaders and whips, as Ross says, to try and make sure that we've got political proportionality for those 2 days and to make sure we can get you a good time to do that. So I'm very happy to support this. I'll propose it. Do we need to second it? I'll need a seconder. Thank you. Are you seconding or are you asking a question?
Got a very, very quick question. Looking through, I can't see where the cabinet member for community safety is in here. I can see everyone but, and I don't understand why that would be.
So, through you, Chair, so we're focusing on those areas that are of significant risk to the council. As per the MTFS, there's additional allocations both in adult social care and children's services over the 24-25 budget period in order to make those services work. We're also picking up the homelessness issue, which is a significant challenge at the moment, and aligned to that, the cost of living. Now, if members were minded to focus on community safety aspect, then certainly we can look to build that in. I think what we've based this on is the risk profile currently shown through the strategic risk register, the considerations that are required by David and his team in reference to the ongoing funding of statutory services. And what we've also done is included at the end of that session the more sort of universal services that I know all members will want to talk about in reference to the budget in terms of street cleaning, transport, those sorts of elements. So we've tried to build in some flexibility to allow for additional sessions if required. Certainly we can take that away. But the absolute focus is on the risks that currently face us and our exponential demand in some of those areas.
Thank you, Ross. That's helpful. It's just that obviously the way in which it's obviously changed from the way that we did last year. It's just that obviously the crematoria is a big issue that's still ongoing. It's just the fact that Councillor Hayden won't be or need to be here when a potential budget pressure in the future and for the next year's budget would be the crematoria. So I don't know what other members of the committee think, or whether that's something that needs to be talked about or needs to be scrutinised by the committee.
Yeah, I think Councillor Stoneman makes a very good point. As I set out, this is not set in stone. There's degrees of flexibility. Obviously, in terms of the financing aspect of the crematoria, Councillor Lowry will be able to assist us with that. He'll be with us for the 2 days, I'm sure. But if we feel that we need to add that in, we can do. We have that flexibility. We're in control of this. But at this stage, it's been flagged before you to say, look, this is what we're proposing with a degree of flexibility inbuilt in terms of what the sessions are focusing on. Identify the risk registers, which the significant children's services, adult social care, homelessness, those are the 3 massive risks for us. Housing and many others, including, and I'll talk about in a moment, ICT provision. That's going to be massive, and I'll be talking about that in just a few moments. So, notwithstanding all of that, this is the proposal with a bit of flexibility. So, unless there are any other questions, I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Topher.
I'll second.
Thank you. So, sorry, Councillor Moore, were you questioning or seconding?
Second.
Thank you. So that's great. Members, if you're happy, we'll put that to the vote. All in favour? Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. And do curb your enthusiasm to join us on the 16th. So just patience, please, patience. Next on the list, staying with the work programme, Ros. We are talking about...
Well, Chair, I think you've you've identified during the course of this meeting homelessness as an issue that you would like to pick up, along with HR and OD,
Yes.
in particular, development of staff. So we'll look to, and of course, further consideration of the Plimpton parking issue. So we'll find the appropriate dates to deliver those. My expectation is parking will be February. I think HROD will probably be February. In terms of homelessness, I think we can probably ask for representations at November, but we will need to double check that.
Super. Thank you so much. And the final bit in ICT before we moved on, I shared with you last time the significance of the DELT contract, which is up for renewal next year. And that has much wider implications in terms of our cyber security. For the organisation, significant financial and reputational risk sits under that banner. And of course, the provision of our ICT across the entire network for the council and in terms of hardware and software and everything else. So, and how the council operates. So this contract renewal is massive in terms of financial risk, reputational risk, and the working practices of the organisation. And the contract renewal is, do we remain with DELT, which is our current provision, or do we actually look at another service provider? So it's a massive decision, and I think this is something that this committee should be looking at. And what I was proposing we do, it naturally falls under this committee, what I was proposing to do was invite members to join a select committee where you could just focus on that. The requirements, it might be 2-3 meetings top in the administrative year, but really highlighting those issues. I know some members have nodded quite enthusiastically last time I said it. What I'm proposing to do is speak to the group leaders and independents to see if we can get, it doesn't have to have that proportionality, political proportionality, but I think it would be useful to have everybody represented in that democratic discussion. So if you would just keep your ears open, and it'd be great, probably 2-3 meetings tops, but it's a very important issue, and there's some very keen officers who've done a tremendous amount of work. I've been briefed as a shadow cabinet member by some fantastic officers who are doing an awful lot of work in terms of the merits, demerits, and the implications. So I'd be grateful if you could give that consideration, and we'll liaise through the various group leads and whips. That's all I wish to say on that. And that takes us to the next item, which is tracking decisions. Can you just, where are we on that first issue already?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, you've 3 tracking decisions on the document. 2 have been completed, and responses have been circulated to you all. I think there's been some miscommunication concerning minute number 6 reference the increase in full-time equivalent workdays lost to staff sickness and what steps are being taken to tackle this issue. There is a response, and we will circulate that in the morning, Chair.
Okay, so I hadn't seen that, and I queried that before the meeting, so I'd be grateful for that, so that's great. Members, I'm incredibly grateful. We've been sat here for a long time. Thank you so much. Is there anything members wish to add at this stage? No? That's great. Thank you so much for your time. Have a very good evening.